Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Macro Micro Moment with myself, Arthur Laffer, and my partner, Nancy Tengler. Busy week, busy day. We were just
Yeah.
lamenting that before we got on.
You know what this is, right? This is a completely fake smile. 'Cause I've been screaming at the TV as I listened to the president's press conference. I'll just say this. When I was raising my kids, I told them words mean something, and you need to say what you mean. We're going to bring in John, but I have no idea. There was no clarity. I don't know what to say. Is it universal tariffs of 10% or 25% on autos and 20% on the EU? Do we add all that up? I mean, as soon as he brought his chart up, the market sold off. So I'm beside myself. So
I
why don't
think
you
the
take
devil
over?
is in the details. We're gonna have to wait
Yeah.
and see because honestly, that just to your point, that speech raised more questions. First is what the hell does reciprocal mean?
Right.
I mean, my God, like
It means transitory.
that's right. He's been hanging out with J Pal too much.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank God we've got John Silvia with us today because
Thank
John
goodness.
was nice enough to agree to come on. And for those of you who watched our earlier segment with John, John is former chief economist of Wells Fargo. I think Zurich Kemper, if I remember correctly. JEC,
Yep. True.
NAIB, right? NAIB.
Yep. You got it.
Okay, so he's won awards. I've known John forever and ever. Fantastic economist, and he's going to try to help us decode some of what we just heard and what we've been hearing about global trade, tariffs,
Sorry.
non-tariff barriers, and currency manipulation.
Well, thank you very much for the nice intro. And as Art mentioned, I am an economist, and I don't apologize for that. It's what I do, it's what I love. I will start off picking up on something Nancy said. Clarity. I don't think anybody in the last week has sat and listened and said that many commentators thought that we would get some sense of clarity with this announcement. And I sympathize with, I think, the sentiment of both Nancy and Art that there isn't a lot of clarity here, in part because, as Art suggested in his own humble way, there's a confusion with respect to uniform, universal, reciprocal tariffs. I will say one thing that I would certainly disagree with President Trump. We are not going to lower the price for consumers. I think, as an economist, that's clearly not going to be a transitory event. We, in fact, know the history of import prices. They will go up. We know the history of what we saw in the aluminum tariffs of 2018. Prices went up for aluminum. They never came back down to the original level after the level of the tariffs were imposed. Interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal talked about a builder in Florida, and he estimated that because of the aluminum and wood tariffs, you would get an additional home price increase of $75,000 to $10,000.
Wow.
We also know we did the steel tariffs in 2002. And once again, when you're thinking about a washing machine, at that time, again, that washing machines do use steel, they don't use plastic. We did see that the prices of washing machines went up and they never came back down. So I think that's the first point that I would raise. The second, and I'll really defer to Art maybe a little bit on fiscal policy here, but here's my problem in terms of tariffs as a revenue raiser. Okay, tariffs may raise revenue, again, assuming there's no substitution going on. But the problem being is those revenues are coming from consumers. and the revenues are going to government. So to me, there's a shift in the power of the economy from the consumer to government, because the consumer is paying the revenues and the consumer is picking up the revenues to spend. And then finally, in terms of economics, and I'll let Nancy talk about all the specifics, but in our conversation before this presentation began, there was a sentiment about farmers. And I think it's very, very important to understand that China is the largest buyer of soybeans from the United States. Doesn't sound like much unless you're in Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, or Indiana. Again, China buys 30% of our pork. So what do you do if you're an Iowa farmer and you're raising pigs? And then finally, and I don't mean to step on Nancy's toes, but the 25% across the board tariff on autos is going to certainly impact what we think of in terms of GM, Ford, and Stellantis. But I'll pick up on Art's comment. Okay, we're going to have a 10% tariff on some countries, maybe 20% on Canada and Mexico. Now, is the 25% or whatever the percentage is on autos on top of that or not? So
Right.
going back to Nancy's point, where's the clarity? I don't see the clarity here. Maybe we'll get it in the next few days. But I think there is a major confusion between my perception of a reciprocal tariff between one country and another on a particular good than the across the board tariffs we seem to be getting in many sectors. And I'll leave it there. I can comment later, but I'll turn it over to Art and Nancy.
Let me just jump in real quick, Arthur. John, this was supposed to be the clarifying moment. And it felt like a campaign speech again. You know, it was a lot about me, and I long for the humility that we saw on the campaign trail, because, you know, Trump has said a lot of things, and I was screaming at the TV, and I can't even remember what it was because there were so many egregious statements. But, you know, you are hearing that your point about the farmers is that the tariffs are moving. And one gentleman, he's a beef farmer, and he said, this is moving me to the left, because he's seeing higher costs and lack of a customer because of the cuts made at the government. Okay, that's fine. But then what the Wall Street Journal says is that the first trade war led to more than 27 billion in losses of agricultural exports, according to the USDA. And that's your point. So soybeans was about 71% of that decline. And I think this is, and then, you know, the auto stocks sold off, and then I'll be quiet, but the auto stocks sold off as soon as he started talking, because most of domestic cars are made abroad. The biggest production of US cars made in the US is Tesla, and it's about 70% of the production. Ford F-150 is 45% produced in the US. So the parts are going back and forth. That was part of the USMCA bill deal that Trump negotiated in Trump 1.0. So honestly, I do not get this. I don't even see it as a negotiating tactic anymore. It's just kind of nuts. Anyway, Arthur, sorry.
I was going to say, you know, it's the first thing I thought of when I didn't read that article in the Journal today. But if car prices keep going up, and they're already, I mean, I bought a new car. I bought a new car recently. I mean, car prices are already very high without this tariff. Housing prices are already very high without increasing lumber prices from Canada or steel inputs, you know, all the copper. So you should expect smaller cars and smaller homes, because it's the only way to get the price down. So the way you have to get prices down on cars, what do? You got to make less car. You can't make the same car as you get before. So people should expect smaller square foot houses, because otherwise they can't afford them. Same thing with cars. We're going to be driving smart cars pretty soon.
No
I
way.
want to drive a smart car.
Carvana was up when he was talking, and that's used cars. Now everything reversed when they brought the chart up, and I'd love to hear what John has been able to glean since we've been talking, if anything. But I don't know what this means any more than I knew yesterday.
Yeah, Nancy, it's got a good point there. If the automobile is already in the United States, it's not going to face a tariff. So when you're talking about used cars, there is a benefit to companies like Carvana. And I would also say, again, with respect to Nancy's point on clarity, it's important to remember this is only step one. We basically are playing a chess game, and we've made our first move, pawn to queen's four. Okay, we got it. But now the other countries are going to start to respond to what we just proposed. And when I listen to President Trump, the theme is, okay, they see we're serious and they're going to lower their tariffs. Well, maybe not. Maybe they're going to sit there and say, okay, guys, you're exporting a lot of X, Y, and Z to us, and we don't like that. So we're going to raise our tariffs on your products in certain areas. So, we've only seen pawn to queen four. We haven't seen the
Right.
rest of the game play out. So again, the clarity that I at least have heard for the last week or so with a lot of financial commentators is simply not there. But I will say, as an economist, your prices are going up. I think it's going to be much more difficult for the Fed to be cutting interest rates at any point in time. I know that there are signs the economy is slowing down. I look at the purchasing managers, the
Yes.
ISM Supply Purchasing Manager Survey, and it's a difficult trade-off for the Fed now. If the economy is slowing and you do get higher prices, is the Fed going to sort of abandon its 2% target and say, well, 3% sounds good to us? Or is it going to stick to its guns with respect to interest rates? And I'll turn it back to Art because he is the expert on politics. But the problem is, to what extent that tension between Powell and Trump on monetary policy really starts to raise concerns in the public domain. But Art, I'll leave that to you.
That's. I think the thing that stunned me the most, John, about this today was, in general speaking, a tariff isn't inflationary in the sense of it necessarily reduces purchasing power because you get substitution effects. I know now I'm starting to sound like an economist, right? So you get the substitution effect. If it's just autos, the consumer is going to start shifting consumption. There's lots of ways they can go. They can start buying motorcycles. They can start buying bikes. They can buy smaller cars. There's lots of ways they can shift, right? But when you start putting a broad-based 10% minimum tariff on all imports, that, even if it's technically not inflationary, it's inflationary. It's going to, you're right. And
You're
it's
right.
like a VAT, it hits everything.
It's hit
And
everything.
what's the Fed going to do? Like, now we're talking about Trump. Like, what is the Fed going to do?
And what is the end game? Because if it's jobs, this is not how you increase jobs. So, oh, dear producer, I sent you a chart on the ISM. I don't know if you have it handy, but yeah. So if you look, so we've seen all this pull forward of imports, right, John? And that's going to drive GDP down. So it's kind of this not market-based mess. So GDP now, I think, is down 3.4% as of yesterday. And a lot of that's the pull forward in imports. But look at this. New orders are down. So that's weird. This is February. New orders are down. Production is down. And employment is down. And that's what drove the ISM into contraction territory this last month. So what say you about that? Because Arthur and I argued about substitution effects this morning, and I was like, takes too long. It's not going to happen. It's going to go. Nobody's going to drive a smart car. But they may buy Teslas, ironically, and they may ride a horse, which is my plan. But like, what do you say about this? Like, is it having the desired effect? Because we saw the pull forward.
I'll make two comments. Again, being the economist, the substitution effect generally in the short run is very limited. Short run being next 3 to 6 months. Over time, substitutions will be found. Now, I'll go back to the ISM graph that you put up there, it's important to note, one, new orders are a leading economic indicator. The fact that that is negative is not good. And then
Right.
second, counter to the claim that we probably all heard earlier today, those employment numbers are negative. So wait a minute, we're doing all this and firms are not going to hire, or at least manufacturing firms.
Right.
And remember, these are manufacturing firms. This is not the broader service economy. So the claim that somehow the manufacturing sector is going to kick up and hire a lot of people is contradicted by this particular graph. So,
Exactly.
so
Yeah, but how
No.
much do you think of its timing, John? I mean, people like you look at if you know there's going to be a tax increase coming, right? What do? You try to accelerate your income, right? As much as you possibly can. And if it's a tax cut in the future, you try to defer income. You try to accelerate your expenses and push your income forward. So how much of the threat of the tariff effect, even though no one knew exactly what it was going to be, but they knew it was coming, do you think is showing up in these numbers where you see acceleration? They probably ramped up manufacturing and now they're going idle because everybody's like, hold on a second, we're going to wait and see what happens.
yeah, I think picking up on Nancy's point, the GDP numbers that I've seen, and I'll quote the Atlanta Fed numbers, driven partly by gold, but even without the gold,
Right.
effect, they're still down 1.5% or so. And it's primarily because a lot of companies brought in product to beat the tariffs. But I suspect that over time, Art, whatever you take, let's say a 2.5% GDP number for last year, it's probably going to be 1.75 this year. That's a definite slowdown.
Yeah.
And I think unless, and again, I'll go back to this point that Nancy raised. We are not getting clarity here. All we're getting is the first move and a very confused state about, again, am I applying the auto tax or motor vehicle tax on top of the other 20 or 15 or 10% rates? That's kind of unusual and we don't get clarity there. So for me, I would stay with the argument that prices are going up. And I'll do that with respect to the prices paid in the ISM manufacturing and service sector numbers. I'll put that with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas trim mean numbers. Those are my indicators of where inflation's going, and it's not going down. And then second, I'll pick up again on Nancy's point. My new orders are down. My employment number is down. My production number is down. That is not a signal of a very strong economy to me. So I think that at least in the short run, there will be a lot of adjustments. But any kind of substitution that we get is going to take time. And I'll go back to one of your favorite topics, Art. I heard today a couple of comments that, well, we've got the tariffs and now we can move forward with the tax cuts. Well, okay, give me your hamburger today and I'll give you 25 cents tomorrow. I mean, that's, okay, but why don't we do the tax cuts first? And remember, the tax cuts are still ephemeral. We haven't really got to that. And I just think that if I'm a business person running a company, I know what my tariff bill is going to be almost right away. But I have no idea what my tax cuts are going to be. I have to operate in the here and now of what I have to do in terms of paying. Well, look at Amazon. All right. I don't know, Nancy probably knows how much of their business comes from third-party firms in China. Well, all of a sudden, those prices have to go up. So I would say, again, we're only at step one. We haven't seen what the reciprocal responses are from other countries. It is very confusion in terms of clarity with respect to Nancy's comment. But to me, it's extremely challenging, and I think disappointing that there seems to be some confusion. I will say that I think what was presented today by President Trump was a mixture of Navarro wanting to go across the board with everything and maybe some of his advisors saying, no, we need to do some reciprocal stuff country by country because that sounds fair. Unfortunately, when it comes to actually doing policy, that can create a lot of confusion for business people and households.
Yeah, and I think, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Arthur.
I was going to ask John, most people have never ever taken a look, and for good reason, on literally how detailed tariffs get. I mean, I was jokingly, although this isn't really much of a joke, that, I was looking at some of the Canadian stuff, like the tariffs they put on poultry from the US. And it's literally like, poultry of these genuses, under six pounds to one, unprocessed, processed, skinless, boneless. I mean, the granularity of tariffs and how each thing has got its own little tariff schedule. How much do you think it was a good idea to have a blanket rate? Like, hey, we're just trying to figure out like what's the trade weighted effective rate of Canadian tariffs on the US, right? And we're just going to come up with a number. Currency manipulation, I don't know how you put a number on that, or non-tariff barriers and how you put a number on that. I'm sure it's a lot of crystal ball waving, magic wands to figure out exactly what the rate is. But do you think it was better to do rather than a true reciprocal where they go, hey, they tax autos, U.S. autos 10%, we're going to tax them 10%. They do chocolate milk, at 13.7. We do chocolate milk 13.7. The way he's done it, do you think it just makes it simpler?
Oh, I think it does make it simpler. It certainly is a step one. I would say again that the complication comes in where we know that, okay, it's pawn to queen four. What's the response? How does Canada respond? How does Mexico respond in terms of altering their tariff policies? And I will say the assumption from what I can glean from the president's comment is they will reduce their tariffs. Well, I think in some cases they may not do that at all. They may decide to do something else. I mean, Canada can easily ship its softwood lumber to China. Okay. I mean, it can do that. I don't know to what extent it can alter oil and gas shipments to the United States in a pipeline. That might be difficult. But they can certainly put a surcharge on electricity going to New York or Minnesota or Michigan or New England. So, I think, as you suggest, Art, in a presentation like this that President Trump did today, it was very simplistic, very media friendly. Okay, I got it. Now we're going to have to work out the details. And going back to Nancy's point, not a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
You seem to side with Nancy a lot, John, considering the fact that you
Everyone
and I
does.
so long.
Everyone. If you looked at the tariffs pre today, and I think that's all we have because we don't have really added clarity. We're talking about 600 billion in annual tariffs, which is 2% of GDP, right? And also, that unravels or offsets any potential corporate tax cuts that were being talked about that haven't even been floated officially yet. So taking the corporate tax rate down from 22% to 15%, that's been washed out. So to your point, John, yeah, they're going to have to pass it along. So maybe, let's use Walmart as an example. Maybe Walmart absorbs some of the costs and margins go down modestly. Maybe they pass some of it along to the consumer and maybe they stick it to their suppliers. And so, some of it washes out. But the point, I think, is that prices are going to go up. I was going to buy a car this year, and I drive an F-150 that, as Arthur knows, it's a trash heap because I have horses and dogs, but I drive an F-150 and I was thinking about getting an American car, maybe like an SUV. And now I'm thinking about buying a Tesla because at least the price increases. Never thought I'd hear myself say that, by the way. Maybe the price increases will be less onerous. But what will happen is if demand declines, what is GM and Ford going to do? Are they going to increase production?
not if demand declines and prices are weak. I mean, we can easily see this in the next few weeks. Let's look at the Silverado.
Yeah.
What happens to the sales and prices of Silverados going forward? Because that is one automobile, truck, SUV, call it what you want, that is primarily foreign produced. So that's a significant challenge. And I'll go back to your comment and refer back to what Art has written about for years, is that 600 billion comes from somewhere, and it just doesn't show up. And if my consumers have to pay 600 billions in taxes, well, again, picking up on Art's point, there's no substitution away from that. I can substitute products, but if I'm getting hit on a bill and my income, I can't substitute. What am I going to do? So I think it's a real negative for me, for the American consumer economy. And philosophically, I do have a problem with the claim that this $600 billion is great because it's revenue from the federal government, when in fact it's coming out of the consumer's pocket. So we're taking it from the private economy and putting it in the government's pocket. Okay,
Again.
I can understand that if that's explicitly stated, but it's not explicitly stated. So I'll turn it back to you folks.
Yeah. Well, this was something that I thought was interesting, just because, you already have the average age of the US automobile at a historic high, at least since 1995. And I think that's as long as the data's been collected, but I don't know that for a fact. And you've seen, new vehicles sort of flatline, and we've seen used cars come down post COVID, but I think that number is just started to lip back up, and I think we're going to see that increase because. So I don't really get the whole let's have a United Auto Worker come to the podium and talk about how great this is, because I'm not sure that this is great. Like as you said, it's only the opening salvo, but we'll see.
I will say, Nancy, you have a good point there, and there was a note earlier this week, and Cleveland Cliffs had a note that they were shutting back steel production because they estimated fewer automobile sales. Now, I'm not the analyst. I don't know much about the company, but that was a headline article in the Wall Street Journal. So I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. Whoever runs Cleveland Cliffs has to know something about their business. And if they're thinking we're going to have less auto sales, so we better cut back steel production, I think that's pretty significant.
That is huge. I didn't see that. I'm just pulling up some of the stock prices.
Yeah.
Arthur?
And I just saw an article that China's buying more soybeans from Brazil.
Steel names are down. Well, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is not my idea of fun. I'll tell you that. All right. Well, anything else? Did we miss anything?
I think we're going to be driving mopeds this year. Like rickshaws and stuff. Like Vietnam.
I'm going to ride my horse so I can fertilize my organic garden, because I'm not going to pay tariffs on tomatoes. I'll tell you that.
Well, I would go back and simply emphasize that there isn't a lot of clarity. Basically, I do see prices going up. I see output, certainly in some sectors, going down. Substitution effects will take time. But as Art just mentioned, Chinese can buy soybeans from Brazil. So good luck to them on that. I think this is an ongoing debate. We could probably have this discussion in 2 months or 3 months and have a whole new set of information.
Yeah, well, we'll do that. John, thank you so much for
asking.
Expertise, and thank you for hopping on this Liberation Day. And I don't even know what that means either. So
Nancy, it's Libation Day. Everybody's gonna be drinking quick before the tariffs hit. Diageo.
All right, well, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go around the world with Arthur when we get back. John, thank you again. So enlightening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, drink your champagne today because it'll be more expensive tomorrow.
Okay.
What most of you don't know is Nancy did the animation herself. When she gets
I
mad,
live for this.
she wants
Live
to
for
launch
it.
me into space. I nicknamed the Space Cadet. So I think I'm just going to do a quick comment on something that happened yesterday, which is unsettling, I think, European markets for sure. And it seems to be following a trend we're seeing globally. But Marine Le Pen was convicted basically of embezzlement. And what's interesting is that she was banned from running for office for, I think, 5 years. And she can't run during the appeal process, which is supposed to take up to another year. So she's going to have to go through appeal this thing. And she can't run for office while she's appealing it. We're expecting French elections probably within the year, maybe not till 2027. So maybe she make it. Not surprising, her popularity has gone through the roof. This looks like flat out election interference. To put it in perspective, 1/5 of the European Parliament has been accused of the same thing that Marine Le Pen has been accused of and prosecuted. Only one prior person was actually prosecuted and investigated. No one else was. Of the 137 people that have been accused of this, basically, it's using campaign basic finance money to pay. It should be used for certain purposes, and what happens is these people use it for other purposes like salaries, bonuses, office space, stuff like that. So she was actually convicted. 137 of the people, only one of them was convicted, and the person, I believe, was under investigation for taking bribes from Qatar. So a little bit of a double standard here. But you see this continued I believe it's really institutionalized disenfranchisement of the electorate in Europe. You're looking at the same stuff going on in Brazil. Bolsonaro, his son under indictment, he's got like 67 counts against him. It's this Supreme judge that's going after him, the same one that went after Elon Musk and X. So you're seeing these activities happening everywhere. It's very daunting. It's very scary. It's scary in general to the democratic process globally.
Yeah, Arthur, I love that you know all this, and I think it's really important. I didn't see the article until this morning because I'm always a step behind with my Wall Street Journal, but you pointed it out to me. And this was one of my favorite quotes, which was the payment system judges said. So it wasn't a jury verdict.
No.
It was judges, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And allowed Le Pen to hand out sizable salaries to members of her inner circle. I'm going to keep reading, but this sounds so familiar. Though she did not enrich herself.
Yeah.
Judges say Le Pen essentially used the payments to prop up her party's machine when National Rally was financially stretched.
Yeah.
So in our country, they financially enrich themselves and they don't go to
And the
jail,
family.
right? I mean, I don't understand this.
Well,
I think you're right. It is 100% lawfare.
and the other thing that's very unusual about as an American looking at their system, so their parties and their process is all financed by federal money. So what happens is your proportional win of the electorate determines how much you're given to basically run your party.
Oh,
It's a very different system than what we have here. And so they're used to getting money from the government to basically run their parties. In fact, one of the things that kills a party becomes self-fulfilling is that these dominant parties, they get these checks every year to basically run their apparatus from the government. So everything's paid out by the federal government. You're talking about like conflicts of interest, huge conflicts of interest.
right.
So this is
Yeah.
normal for the Europeans and a lot of other countries actually.
Well, it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned, folks. We'll see what happens. And if you're online watching us live stream, please join the chat. And if you want to make us laugh, ask for the animation with Arthur again, because that just
Hey, yours isn't as bad. Like yours is just what I expect you. Like you got some awesome shoes that you purchased. That you're like, hey, me,
all
it's like
right. Well, let's to the moon,
to the
Arthur.
moon, Alice.
Let's start with oh, there I am.
It looks like a Mac.
That's what I have at home. Let's just talk a little bit about post tariffs. We still don't, like, as we discussed in the first segment, we don't have clarity. But there's a couple things I think investors should watch tomorrow. One is going to be Tesla. It was up initially in the after hours trading on before the chart came up that was brought up by our great commerce secretary, quote unquote, Howard Lutnick, according to President Trump. And so now it's showing down, but watch it because it is the biggest national producer of cars. And don't forget that the Model Y is the fastest selling car on the globe. So you've heard about the deliveries today, which were disappointing. They were down 13% in some in foreign markets, but they still can't produce enough Model Ys. So I think the numbers I've seen are about 70% of the car is actually produced in the U.S. compared to my chosen vehicle, the F-150, which is about 45%. So then you can either watch Ford or GM, but I think what we're going to see is pressure on these companies as we get more clarity. But what we know is if this 25% tariff stands, then these companies are going to be in trouble with when they're going to have to rejigger their supply chains. And as we've talked about, that's going to take a very long time. So that we probably don't have the GM chart, but then look at the steel companies. Steel Dynamics is a name that is pretty representative of the steel business. And I love John's comments about Cleveland Cliffs because that's one of the other major steel companies cutting back. And you can see that Steel Dynamics is down because if there's less demand for cars, there's going to be less demand for steel. And then lastly, I don't remember what chart I asked John, the team to put up. Oh, there's General Motors. So you can see it's also down about 2.5% in the aftermarket. And I had one more, but I don't remember what it was. But just watch the manufacturing companies. They are, we saw those ISM numbers. We talked about them earlier. New orders are down. That's not good. Leading indicator, as John pointed out. And employment is down, which flies in the face of, why we're doing tariffs in the first place, at least at what we're being told. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back next week with another great guest and lots of opinion.
That's one thing we don't have in short supply. No tariffs on that.
All right. Well, it's National Libation Day, so go pour yourself something, and we'll be commiserating with you from our little purchase. So thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.